What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Uncensored Critic podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Welcome back. Thank you, as always. Today, we welcome along Elliot Cohen, an actor who has just appeared in A Little Life at the Harold Pinter Theatre and the Savoy. And that's not the only credit to his or string to his bow. Yeah, Elliot has an impeccable CV, and I'll read just a few credits out for you now. So Elliot trained at RADA, and he spent some time at the National Youth Music Theatre. He also has a first-class degree in drama from the University of Birmingham. For film, he has appeared in things such as The Golden Compass, Alexander, Muse, and After Berlin. For TV, The Crown, Death in Paradise, Peaky Blinders, and Foyle's War. And for theatre, he has played Macbeth at the Globe, The Streetcar Named Desire at the Donmar, Henry V at the Royal Exchange, where he won the Men's Theatre Award for Best Actor in 2007, Julius Caesar at the Sheffield Crucible, LeBlanc at the National, directed by Yal Faber, and of course A Little Life at the Pinter and the Savoy, directed by a certain Ivo Van Hove. And Elliot, welcome.
Thank you very much, Oliver. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Good to see you, man. So we start with the starter question for every guest. To begin at the beginning, where did it all come from? Where did it all come from, man? The love of acting.
I would say it's probably started as an instinct for showing off, I suppose, that I had when I was a child. And now I look back at when I look at my daughter and my son grow up, I'm sort of reminded of how maybe I was in nature when I was of a similar age, and how I take it for granted that was always part of me, or children's play, or their own confidence in nature. But I suppose now I see the disparity between my kids and other kids, and what each one is instinctively good at, or likes to do, or spends their time doing. I realized that I just had a natural propensity or feeling towards reaching people in that way. I have memories of sort of trying to tell long jokes that my parents indulged me in not interrupting. And I was taken to the theatre a great deal by my parents. I mean, I suppose theatre was initially a thing that we did as a family before it became a specific personal pursuit. Even, sort of as early as I did start to do theatre and plays at school, my parents were the first people to tell me about theatre, to take me to theatre. It was something we did more than, say, going to football or going to the cinema. Even we made a point of going to the local theatre. I grew up in Colchester, and the Mercury Theatre was our stalwart. Every holiday we'd see whatever was on, and then we would have treat trips up to the West End to see musicals and shows that were deemed suitable or sort of exciting for us as we grew up. And my parents would tell me stories of how they spent a lot of time doing performance when they first met. Neither of them do so professionally, but my dad's a doctor, and my mum has been a full-time mum and an artist and a charity worker on and off her adult life. But when she met my dad, she was in some kind of cabaret group, and my dad did a lot of medical dramas, or not medical dramas. He did lots of plays at medical school at Guy's Hospital.
All right.
And he and she used to regale us with stories of how this particular production of Recruiting Officer was exceptional, or when we did this cabaret up above a pub in Camden, and your mum's wig almost caught fire because they were so close to the lights, and things like that were part of my the vernacular and the storytelling, the sort of mythology of our family. And they had a pile of programs which I've inherited and are now somewhere in this house I've just moved into, from dating back to the 60s, and when they used to be able to get medical school discounts and go and sit in the gods for a couple of pence or a couple of quid or whatever it was. And for productions such as Richard Burton's Hamlet, directed by Gielgud, which has revisited the West End stage lately, my parents saw from the gods, and Peter O'Toole's Macbeth, and so on and so forth, and
Wow.
and Richard Harris playing. Oh, I don't think it was Richard Harris playing Camelot on the stage, but that vintage of performer that my parents were avid fans of, and they used to date doing, going to see. So that was all part of the fabric of their lives that we then obviously exploded into as me and my brother and sister, and I'm the eldest, so I got the kind of vanguard experience. And then they just made sure that we were at schools where they took drama seriously, and it was a time where you could easily find such schools. And I went to a prep school, and that was a privilege to have such a lot of theatre and music available to me there, and I just grabbed it by both hands, and I sort of thought that that's what everyone would do, but I realize now that that was quite exceptional. Well, not exceptional, it was just particular, to me. And then I suppose I just did that for a long time until I got to boarding school, and I was up there trying to keep myself out of trouble, and I did loads of plays. I started picking up things like theatre studies A level, and then I met when girls arrived in the sixth form, I got cast in West Side Story, and yeah, I got recast. I got fired first of all, and then I got recast, which was lucky. But on the floor in the rehearsal room of that show, I met and started dating a new girl who had arrived, and she came from St Paul's in London, and her parents were connected to opera down here in London, and also the NYMT by sort of association of friends and so on. And I'd never heard of that before. But I played Rip in West Side Story, and my new girlfriend's mum saw me in that and said, "You know what? You should be in the NYMT. You should audition." So, never having heard of it myself, I relied on her to set that up for me. And I auditioned. I guess it was in the new year of that particular academic year, and I got cast in a production of Whistle Down the Wind, which was not the one that you know of by Andrew Lloyd Webber, but the one he saw that gave him the idea. That's a long story, but suffice to say, I was thrown into the NYMT with a bunch of exceptionally talented, far more talented people than me, brilliant singers, dancers, amazing performers. I was a complete rookie. They just cast me, I think, because I was tall and I could hit a bottom G, and they cast me as the older, grumpier. I played Eddie the cat killer in that particular production, who opens the production by drowning kittens, and I suppose you might say I was typecast from there on out. But particularly considering my recent performances. But yeah, I got in with the crowd then. It was outside of boarding school, enclosed, very sort of myopic type of career seeking, and I was sensing a new type of lifestyle, an opportunity available to me, like my friends were from the NYMT, that they had been already introduced to from various other drama groups and so on. And they were off to Mount View and Central and places like that. And I knew I couldn't hack the musical theatre thing immediately. I mean, I could have given it a go and got there in the fullness of time, but I started thinking, right, maybe drama school is the next step. But on my road towards auditioning for them, my father and I had a chat, and as well as dissuading me from becoming a doctor at one point, like him, he also encouraged me to go and get a degree. And I took that seriously because he had such a raft of references of people he enjoyed. His opinion was that actors who know about theatre are the higher quality of actor, and there's a certain amount of, I guess, snobbery about that, but he came from that kind of vantage point, and I sort of thought, well, I love learning about it. I love the history. I love the fabric of it. I love the mechanics of it. Acting's great, but I also love thinking and reading about it. So yeah, okay, I'll do a degree. But I auditioned at both. I auditioned at drama school and interviewed and did my A levels towards universities, and I got offers to both. Not my top choices at the time for drama schools, although some good ones. And I just decided that I should go for, in the end, I should go for a university degree. And I chose Birmingham because it had a really good range of practical and historic and theoretical. And also I could do some dance stuff, contemporary dance, which I'd never thought of doing before. But yeah, so I thought I'd do that first, and then I would hone in on acting as I went. And that's what I did. I just kept on sort of like trying to put it off, and it would just arrive as the thing that I must do, the imperative choice, rather than direct or choreograph, as I tried for a bit, or design or anything like that, or write even. I was like, you know what, I just got to be in a show. Give me a show. And I kept on auditioning, and eventually I got, well, from university, I got into drama school. So I studied for 6 years, which is almost long enough to have become a doctor. I should be a doctor in acting, but unfortunately, I just got two. I got one degree and one diploma at the time RADA offered you. So that's all I have been behind my name. But it set me up to get agents and stuff. And I suppose I just got my head down, and I've never looked back. And And I count myself lucky as that acting is the only job I've done for 23 years or something, 22 years. And it's been pretty dicey from time to time, but I've
Mm.
just bit by bit taken every day as it came. And I worked hard, particularly at the beginning, to get myself about.
Mhm.
But I always had the passion, I suppose. And that was born by a particular experience, which I've leapt over. But I do, I think I've always had that inside me. And
Mm.
then you just try, once you're in the community, I suppose you try and just kind of keep connections and moving around within it and take new challenges when they're offered, because
Mm.
they're not always offered. You have to go find them or whatever. But yeah, so that's it really. Just by default, here I find myself speaking to you.
All building towards something. I like it. That's great. Tell me about your time at Birmingham. So, because I studied drama at university as well and had a bit of
Uh-huh.
a love hate relationship with the course because I love
Mhm.
the fact I was involved in drama and reading Shakespeare, but not so happy I was writing too many essays and not enough practical stuff. So, tell me about. Funny enough, I actually applied to Birmingham. Actually, I didn't get an offer, but never mind.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're lost.
yeah. Now tell me about your university experience at Birmingham. What was it like?
Yeah, I actually loved all the essay thing, to be fair. I was a bit
Wow.
of a nerd, I guess, in as much that I did loads and loads of plays. I mean, we weren't allowed outside our degree to do the union stuff, the guild theatre drama group, as it was called, although we did. And I got hooked up with some really great guys in the course and outside the course who were kind of ambitious to take shows up to Edinburgh and put little shows on at the Midlands Arts Centre in Edgbaston. And I just did that all the time, as well
Mm,
as the sort of guild stuff like musicals and what have you. So I moonlit outside my course, which was pretty fully involved, like most of these kind of practical degrees are. It's not just kind of 5 hours a week and a couple of seminars. It's like 9 till 5 every day, and then in the
yeah.
evenings I was slotting into rehearsals. Um, and we had some great tutors who were like really invested in their particular subjects and would teach you about them. You know, the seminars that they held were in reference to a book they had just been researching or written or released or whatever, or paper they're working on. So it covered a lot of historic styles of performance and sort of movements in theatre and different eras, historic and political and even sort of psychological. We sort of looked at madness in theatre and
Mm,
psychology in theatre, and it brought us closer to people, you know, like Stella Adler and the attitudes of acting changing in the 20th century after Freud and after film and so on. And or we could study something like melodrama face acting, that's called, where you know all the gestures of a dramatic hero for Victoria melodrama was sort of studied and drawn up by somebody who was writing a book about it, and we would learn about it, we would play that out, and we would write essays about the history and about the way it made us feel, or the way that we produced something around it. And like I say, I had this sister drama dance degree, and we could hop into that and do crazy stuff with. We had to do Laban notation, which was a bit weird, but
mhm.
we pulled from DV8 and Pina Bausch and Merce Cunningham and like people I never would have heard of or been interested, Martha Graham, been interested in if I hadn't done that part of the degree. And
Mhm.
even writing about those people, I kind of found interest in that because it was all essentially about the body and about the voice and about the approach to storytelling or breaking down plays into something that you could, um, I don't know, you could either mount or I had an idea that it one day might become something to do with directing, but I enjoy just being in that milieu. And like I say, we took shows to Edinburgh most summers, and I did loads of other things otherwise. And it really gave me my best group of friends, I think, that I've managed to acquire amongst
Mm.
you know, to different communities because we were just at that stage where we'd left school behind and we had focused on one thing. And I could have had this at drama school, but I'd already had it once by the time I got there with these guys at that really formative moment in my life when I was like 19 to 22. And it really mattered that we were all doing the same thing and we were in a city that would allow us to go and see a lot and listen to a lot and hang out with different. And it was just sort of, it was more free, I think, than drama school can be. You
Yeah.
know, there's more of a range of things. And I think it were, but I knew when I was performing often, I know I'm not hitting this quite right, particularly vocally. I
Yeah.
remember thinking, I'm not articulating well enough. I don't have control of my embouchure, of my faculty. I don't have my breathing down. I was quite in my body. I've been good with my body thanks to that course, because it really gave me an approach to look at my body in different planes and different kind of rhythms and ways. But I just knew that no one there was teaching me how to act well for the career, for the profession.
Mm.
Because all these different things are face it, they're useful. I've drawn from them, and maybe if you do a certain parody or certain style of performance, I've pulled on those things. But RADA was really where I learned the style of different genres of performance, from restoration through to Shakespeare or TV or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was less esoteric and less mercurial, and I suppose, I got down to how the industry would use me when I got to RADA. But it meant that when I got to RADA, I did have a kind of schism there. It was a bit hard to land well and feel like there was a range of people from different experiences, different ages, different ideas of what it was all going to be about. And I was very focused, and I was probably very earnest, and I felt very responsible for having to go to a second degree and leaning on my parents even longer. And I didn't want to waste time. And I really got my head into acting now. I've done this and that range of stuff. Now it's acting.
Mm.
And I think there was a different rhythm in my year. Sometimes we weren't all on that same song sheet. And I also felt that I perhaps used my head too much sometimes.
Yeah.
As you can tell, I'm quite a talky, thinky guy. And after all of that, all those, essays and all those sort of books I'd read and different vantage points I've been asked to take round the idea of telling a story. It's all essentially, character journey in some kind.
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing it from all this, and it got me into hot water a couple of times with some tutors at RADA, and perhaps with my classmates who probably thought I was a bit of a dick some of the time. And I wasn't alone in being a dick, but also alone in being a postgrad. There were lots of, we had a doctor in our year. We had people from other universities with, Cambridge and Oxford with degrees in whatever, as well as drama degrees. So, but I definitely have thought my way through things a bit more than I perhaps was encouraged to at RADA. Get out of your head, get back into intention or body, and so on and so forth. Don't protect yourself with this cerebral approach. So I had to shake all of that, even though I felt myself quite able to use my body at the same time. So, but I'm glad I did it the way I did it, friends wise, lifetime wise. And I think it also has given me a huge range of understanding and different approaches to, it's my love, theatre is my love. And what's wrong with studying it for 6 years if ultimately when I got out there, I came across this letter the other day from Chris Fetters, who ran the drama centre when I auditioned as a schoolboy, as a public schoolboy that no doubt he thought was trouble anyway, or unlikable anyway. But he had a reputation of being a real hard taskmaster and stripping people down and breaking them down and building them back up. And apparently Tony Hopkins based part of Hannibal Lecter on him. And and when I auditioned for that, there's a long story, but basically I got a place, and then I said I'd reject it, and I said, thank you very much, but I'm going to university, and then I will audition again and maybe come back. And he wrote me this long letter just telling me I was a fool for doing that I would be out to seed by the time I would finish both those degrees, and all my competitors would be 3 years ahead of me, and I would be, less experienced, were not known. I'd be older and wrinklier and more craggy and out of sync with everyone else. You've got to get in early and don't stop. And it shook me for about half an hour. But as I wrote my reply, I clarified to me that I felt I was doing the right thing. And I think I've been vindicated in that without tooting my own horn. I think sometimes we all, it crosses your mind, could it have been different in different ways? But, I've managed to pull it off. And I think that can be the way for people. But equally, when people ask me, should I go to drama school? My friends who are the most successful, famous people in the game just happen not to have gone to drama school. They've started a career and maybe a degree and moved on before, but loads have. But actually, the most successful actor I know didn't. So what am I to say? Just go for it if you think you're going to be like him. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, that's my little spotted version of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Jodie Comer didn't go to drama school either. You know, she's another one who her speech to the Olivier's was saying that, you know, if you haven't gone to drama school, you know, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, it does help, but if not, then there is a way forward for it, which is great. So your experience, actually, no, I was thinking about like the similarities or the differences between university and RADA, but just before we get on to that, if you had your time again and you go back to that moment where you got that letter in your hand saying, "Oh, don't go to university, come to drama school." It's a bit of a silly question, really, but do you think you wouldn't change what you did? You're happy with what the decision you made?
Yeah, because I mean, you never know, and things aren't necessarily, it's a fool's errand, I think, in the world of acting and the world at large, to be looking back and wondering what if,
Yeah,
and looking at your patriot your comrades and going, he didn't even go, or she didn't even go. Maybe I should have done that. Look how much they. But then there's the ebb and flow. Once you've been doing it for 20 odd years, you realize there's such an ebb and flow, an advancement and a sort of like cooling off. And looking at acting as a whole, you have to have got this far, this long into it. I've worked out various means of self-protection, survival, and mental health kind of approaches, which mean that I don't get myself tied up like that anymore.
yeah,
And I don't think I did ever really. I never thought about that issue. I think I've thought about other issues maybe, and how, since leaving both of those institutions, maybe I've made some choices which I've or not applied myself to certain things that maybe I should have done that more of, or
um,
and actually during COVID, I had a very different type of crisis when we were essentially as actors useless. Even
yeah,
though eventually I quite quickly I did get back onto work, but for those
yeah,
first few months, 6 months,
mm,
I was just, it made me think at 43 or whatever I was at the time, maybe I should have been a doctor, just because at that point in my time, it felt like I would have been highly, highly useful. It would have really screwed me up and everything else, because I've
mm,
seen what it's done to my friends who are doctors, but I would have had purpose in a way that was very acutely necessary.
mm,
And I felt like a bit of a bit sort of useless and a bit infantile by not being more helpful, even though I
yeah,
tried to in my own small ways. So I
mm,
had that crisis more recently, but not one of whether I should have got into the profession quicker. Because in
yeah,
the end, I don't think it made a huge amount of difference. I wasn't ready either. I would
yeah,
have been if I'd gone just from drama school, like some people I know have done, not from drama school, from university. I know some people have done that, and some have done really well. I was at university with Matt Good. He was a year
mm,
below me, and I lived with him in the first way. But then no, he didn't. He went to Webber Douglas for a year. So even he, but I know others who just went straight from university, and they probably have had wonderful careers in a different way, but not many of them have succeeded
mm,
immediately into acting on its own merits, from university. I
yeah,
think that 3 years I spent on my voice, on my kind of like professional equipment, I think really helped, and I'm
yeah.
glad I did it. And I loved university too, so I don't regret doing both. No.
Absolutely not. So, but what would you say were some of the similarities or the differences between your experience training in Birmingham and then when you went off to RADA?
Well, there weren't many similarities, I have to say. The
Hmm.
similarity was that it was all theatre. That was it, really. I think I had far more of an awareness or an approach to acting or performance, or the making of productions, that was more avant-garde and
Yeah,
more international, because I studied people like Peter Sellers from the US, and Robert Lepage, and I look at a lot of complicite at the time, and that was the kind of genre of, or that was the approach to theatre that we were excited by and would write about, as well as all those choreographers and people in the past, in like like my German expressionism and Brecht and Stanislavski, to a point we broke down. But it wasn't really about how to do it. It was about how people have done it. And I suppose that's the difference ultimately, is that it was great to learn about how people have done it. I loved reading about those old productions or those big productions of late that were happening over in Canada or somewhere.
Yeah.
And occasionally they'd come to the international festival and I got to see them and I'd think, wow, for 7 hours, watch something Robert Lepage had done or whatever.
Wow.
And that's always still with me. I still do love that kind of production. But um, it's really how RADA's basically teaching you how to stand on stage and get this to them in the moment. Like, and whatever happens, do it and do it well and honor what you've been given by way of text and who's there in front of you. You are the glue between, you're the fulcrum of that particular balance. And if you don't know what you're doing, if your body isn't prepared, if your voice isn't prepared, and if your approach mentally isn't right, then you're going to fail that system, that equation. And you can apply that to all that stuff that I like to read about in the day as well at university. But RADA just showed me how to be there in the space and do it. And don't fuck about too much. You can, you should explore. And I've got myself into all sorts of trouble in the past as well from exploring, but explore in the moment daily. Every second is an exploration, but you've got to get it done and you've got to know what to do. And it showed me those systems of starting my machinery up and getting and using it to the best of its ability. It helped that I had read a lot and that I knew about different people and different places, different plays, different, I read a lot of old text, Greek text or whatever, not in Greek, but, but, it made certain things simpler, but I was a complete novice in other ways. And I was really, pulled up short on how to be. And it really helped me. RADA has helped me as well as just doing it, but it gave me the kernel to access my emotions more readily than I did at university. It was a fluke when I did at university, find myself in an emotional sort of on a wave that I was surfing. These days I can generate that myself. And I think RADA, a particular teacher I had, gave me the key to that. And I think, the practical doing of it is basically what RADA was for me.
Yeah. What's the secret to that? How do you get what you're feeling here out into there? What's the secret?
That's a good question, isn't it? What's the secret? True and false, or whomever's trying to write a book, I guess, about acting, they're trying to give you that. I suppose the other day when I was on a film set, when I had to just come in for a second day of filming and then fall to pieces in front of an actor I just met about, my character's particular trauma. I remember thinking, just don't push, don't squeeze, be relaxed, hold the moment in with the lightest hands you can. And remember how it was. I thought this in the moment, because every night when I was on stage or in the wings of the Savoy or the Pinter before A Little Life, it quite quickly got to a place, really early on with that production, that I felt relaxed and open and prepared to just see what happened when I walked on stage to meet most often with James, or I think all my stuff was James. And I think doing a show every night for a long time like that, as I have done a few times in my career, gives you the ability to get out of your own way. You stop trying to fight and reach for it in the way that I did when I was at university. I remember squeezing everything, trying to make everything happen, inside and out. And if it needed to be emotion of one kind or another, I would grit it out like sieve with constipated energy. And it would hurt, literally, everything about me,
Yeah.
And sometimes it would seem impactful and people would be like, wow, what was that? But other times it was probably more like, yeah, what the fuck was that?
Don't ever do that again.
But because we only did shows for 3 days or, a week at most or something, and apart from we went to Edinburgh and we did a few more, but I think you never get the feeling of anything other than just like having to kind of like do it and I'm going to fucking enjoy it. And all, we've worked so hard, and this is to get an agent, or this is to get cast in the next show next term, or to
Mm.
prove that that tutor's wrong, that I can, hit the end of a sentence, or I can carry a show, or whatever. And that never leaves you that sense of needing to somehow be validated. But
Yeah.
that's an interesting subject that older actors will talk about. But I feel like I think if the secret has to be relaxation of some kind or other, and from that comes a sort of zone-ishness,
Yeah.
like a meditativeness or a preparedness that means that whatever happens, it's okay because you can hold it and respond to it without anxiety. And sometimes, obviously, anxiety or pressure or adrenaline informs. I mean, it's rare that you're on stage without a tinge of adrenaline or something
Mm.
to up your ante to up levels. But then that becomes so instinctual, that sort of like presence on stage by being witnessed by so many people. The elevation of that energy happens, and it's as normal as just sliding into a bath, and that the temperature is different to how it was when you were stood beside the bath. But
Mm.
unless you've overdone it and you haven't had a bath, you're not going to go pop. The trick is knowing the temperature, and you slide in and not jumping out with a burnt bum. And that's what daily runs do for me, and
Mm.
with my approach to a warm-up, so I can get there, and I feel my body is nicely stretched like a piece of silly putty that's sort of been in my hands for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a strict warmer-upper, and I do it all from top to bottom every night the same pretty much way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just walk on and go, here we are. And it's weird because one moment, if you're like that, that means just before you go on, you could be doing something very light. And then when you're in, you're doing something very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard other actors far more, successful and talented than me, Judi Dench or Kevin Spacey, whom I should perhaps
Oh.
no. I mean, I've worked with Kevin Spacey, and I saw him in action, and I've heard Judi Dench was the same when they worked together on something. They just keep like, it's not really happening, and then they slide in, and it's all there. But that segue is an important deception,
Mm-hmm.
so that your body doesn't change its disposition from normal sort of relaxed poise to tension and grasping and pushing.
Mm.
So I think that's not really a secret, I suppose, but that's just my observation, and that's what I try and remind myself of when I feel something else creeping in.
Mm.
I know will shut me down.
Yeah, that's what reminds me of one thing I took from drama school was something that Michael Chekhov talks about, which is just a feeling of ease. Whatever you do it with ease, and let it naturally just come to you in that way. Don't force it, as you say, don't squeeze. I'm reminded of a story. You mentioned John Gielgud earlier, and I spoke to someone on here called Harry Burton, who's just a good friend of mine, and a Pinter extraordinaire, knew him for many, many years. He told the story that Pinter told this story in Harry's documentary. He said that Gielgud and Richardson were waiting to go on for No Man's Land, the original in 1975. They're literally in the wings. They're about to walk on, and they're not doing any kind of like nerves or trembling. They're just simply saying to each other, "What do you have for dinner tonight, old boy?" "Oh, I did this." I was like, "Oh, did you have some wine?" "Yeah, lovely wine. It was really lovely." And then they go, stage manager goes, "Okay, you're on." And on they went, and it's, when you get to that level of relaxation and like you just know it's all there, then you don't need to sort of fidget or know anything.
No, and I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a concentration in the wings, and certainly was in a little life, that pervades because of the material, and also because of the responsibility of just performing every night. And I think Gielgud and Richardson are a class of their own. Although I have just a moment before then, I was reminded of something I've heard Richardson say about performance, about, well, how do you do it night after night, coming up with something new to do or whatever. And he says, no, I don't come up with new stuff. I try to get rid of as much as I can. That's me paraphrasing, but
Okay.
from what I understood, it's like a process of elimination rather than recreation, or sort of like finding yet more things to add to it. What can you do? How can you tell the story with how little can you tell the story with and be affecting and clear with. And I think that might be connected to the idea of relaxation, because it's possible just to stand on the stage and listen and be mesmeric.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a teacher at drum school who used to say, "You're interesting enough. Don't try to be any more interesting than you are, because actually you being on stage, saying that, doing that, making that happen, because your intention is clear, is interesting enough. So don't feel like you have to ladle on anything else or layer on anything else." And that's I think that is connected to what you've just said about those two guys about to go on. And I'm familiar with the degree of flip flop that we can do backstage after a long time, but in order just to keep that sense of lightness and simplicity and psyching myself up before we go on. Sometimes it's necessary, just get that little physical impetus, that sort of physical action. I think that Stanislavski turned out, switching his theories towards at the end of his life,
Mm-hmm.
that you can run away to feel scared, not just run away because you're scared. So if you do something physical, it can make your emotions come through that, which
Yeah.
I'm familiar with as well. That little thing you do just to make it feel like you just got there, you just run up the stairs or whatever.
Yeah.
But I also sort of liken it to, there is a sort of edging element to it where you're just on the cusp of emotional release, but you're in the space backstage where no one would know that to look at you.
Mm.
They aren't aware that you're sort of
You
getting
marvel. You
somewhere.
marvel.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm pretty noisy backstage when it comes to little vocal tics I have to warm up, but that little moment of I'm ready and it's about to happen and I know where I'm going to go is almost like pre-climactic. You're just on the edge of something that's just going to happen if you touch it.
Mm.
And I think that's a nice place to be for me. But it requires all those little physical preparations to get there for me.
Yeah. We'll talk a bit more about that later, but let's jump into your most recent credit, A Little Life. I said to you before we came on, I was lucky enough to actually get a ticket and sit on stage because some of the audience were there on stage for when it was at the Pinter and of course at the Savoy as well. What a show. It was just, everything about it was spectacular. It was beautifully done. It was crafted, and your performances as your three characters were just amazing. You did an incredible job, Elliot. And, it was a show that because I went to see a matinee. And, the story of the show, if anyone who's not familiar, it's about Jude St Francis, about his trauma as a young kid and the long-term effects of such deep childhood trauma. And yeah, I just remember watching thinking, wow, this is something really, really special and really, really important, to bring out. It's a tough message, but it's got to be brought out, I think. But yeah, I went to see a matinee and I finished it and I'm just thinking, wait, these guys have got to do all that again. The show was nearly 4 hours long. It's about 3 hours 45. Finished the matinee and I thought, right, these guys have got like an hour off and then they've got to do all that again. Yeah, well, I'll ask you that question a bit later. But first of all, how did you hear about the job? Did your agent ring you up? Did Ivo come to you? Did Hanya come to you? How did it all start?
Yeah, it was just well, thank you. First of all, thank you for all of that. That's lovely to hear, and I'm glad it had its desired effect on you. It's funny you talk about the important message or the feel. It's important for it to have been seen or something that it's carried over. That I don't think everyone shares that opinion, but I certainly do, and I feel like from experience of being on stage and meeting hundreds of people afterwards who've seen it and what they've had to say to us. About the book as well. It seems like for certain people, it is a very healing or protecting or reassuring and profound, affecting story. And to have seen it on stage hasn't detracted from that for people, I think. And having taken what characters and story people have fallen in love with from a book that has been divisive and is demanding and people don't always finish, get through a second time in actual real time and space is a big ask. And I think people have, in the main, agreed that it was a good idea to do it. And I'm
Yeah.
glad you feel the same way. And I felt the
Absolutely.
same way because I felt the same way because at the beginning I wasn't sure. And when I first was contacted by my agent as I was about this time last year, to read A Little Life, the play, that I'd heard the title and I knew it was a book because my partner had tried to read it when it first came out some years ago. And she said that she couldn't get to the end. I remember her trying to get through it, next to me in bed, she would read it and
Yeah.
often put it down. Um, but when I mentioned it to her, she said, "Yeah, I didn't ever get past that part at the end that happens," and that seemed to be quite common. But when I read the play, I was like, "Really? Who's going to want to see this?" I
Mm.
mean, I wanted to work with Ivo big time. I'd met with him once before for another project, and I'd seen 2 or 3 of his productions and loved them. And I had made it like about 5 years previously as a career ambition to work with him.
Mm.
But I was like a bit conflicted when I read the play, because I just I felt that the subject matter was just going to be too demanding and off-putting for people. Um, there was, it was still relatively soon after COVID had had its impact on us all,
Mm.
and people have been talking about sort of escapism in theatre. And I'd done a play called 222 the year before, which was had its had its demands, but also was just good fun and escapist for a lot of people at that time to have jump scares and laughs and all that kind of theatricality, which only theatre can do. And I didn't think people wanted such a downer. Plus, I just wondered why would I want to play these 3 parts
Mm.
as they are presented in the play? And I hadn't even read the whole book by then, so I didn't know how bad it could have been. Um, but it was Evo, and also my agent said, "Look, this book means a lot to me. I loved this book. Please consider it." So I was like, "Okay, sure."
Mm.
So I went to meet Evo, and I prepared less rigorously than I did the first time I met him, where I had worked my butt off for like 10 days and knew the whole play virtually off by heart, and still didn't get the role. But in this case, I thought, right, I'm going to hold this one lightly because I'm not sure. Plus, I had already contacted the casting director via my agent to find out what was going on by way of pastoral care for us all, or for the cast, and in particular, Jude and the 3 bad guys. Because already that year, I had begun to wonder and feel that mental health issues in our industry hadn't been the top of my agenda,
Yeah.
certainly
Mm.
since beginning of my career. Although with a certain amount of overview created by COVID and my own age and experience and a certain amount of connecting the dots, I realized, oh shit, yeah, I do end up getting pretty affected by these things without me intending to be. You can't just leave them at the door always, or they
Yeah.
start to manifest and
Yeah.
like start to get malignant as you go through your run, depending on who you're with and how it's treated and how well it's received and so on. But
Mm.
even doing 222, where I basically played a bit of a gaslighting arsehole husband, even that left me with real challenges with dealing with being the guy that people booed and hissed and wanted to sort of throw things at.
Mm.
And whilst it was all done in the best humor and the best fun, best of times and people. So already last year I did a bit of research about how people get support these days, and I'd uncovered a couple of not uncovered, but I'd encountered and discovered a couple of organisations that had recently been set up that were beginning to take this sort of stuff seriously, and spoke to the leaders of those groups, Applause for Thought, Wellbeing in the Arts, and Victoria Abbott Therapy for Artists and Theatre People,
Mm-hmm.
all of whom I contacted on Instagram or otherwise for the preceding months, and just wanted to have a conversation with them about it because I thought of doing some work on their behalf or with them, and then I kind of like had forgotten about it because of one thing or the other. But when I asked what's going on for all of that with this show, all those names came back up. They
Mm.
said, well, Emily, our producer, Wessex Grove as a group, had stepped up And so I had the casting director already and said, this has all been covered by the producers. You will have a certain amount of therapy available to you every week and various other physical therapy, but you will have the access to applause for thoughts, first aid, mental health first aid, and, as I say, some decompression therapy and various breakout rooms and various other. They were obviously taking it really seriously.
Yeah.
So when I went into the audition, that's one of the questions I asked. Ivo was there. Ivo deferred to his producers, and it seemed like he was open to it too, because I'd never worked with Ivo, but I'd heard he could be demanding in his sometimes distance from the actor, in his approach to working with actors differently to how some British actors are sort of directors are very, avuncular and in with the stories, in with the sort of joshing about and the sort of the lovely stuff that you get in institutions from our British theatrical heritage. And I just got the sense that he wasn't like that from what people had told me. And I didn't want to be isolated. So all of this was reassuring. I did my read. It was, as I say, it was all right. I did pretty okay. And I forgot about it, went off to play an arsehole in another thing for a while. And then I got the call. I got the information that they liked me. It was going to Hanya. Hanya was going to look at my tape, and she was then going to give me a yay or a nay. And I then got the offer. So she had obviously responded to it. And I took a while then talking to some people to accept it. It felt like the right thing to do, but I just wanted to make sure. So, I talked about it a lot with my partner because, I've got two kids with her, and they are now 10 and 7, but they were, sort of 9 and 6 or something at the time. And my parents, who come to everything, were probably going to be a bit overawed by this one, and other members of my tight group, friends and family, just wanted to sort of sound out with. And most people were really supportive. Everyone was seemingly supportive, and in the end, I thought that I had very little reason to say no. And actually, if all this was probably me just being a bit scared, it's like fear talking through these cynicisms I was having about X, Y, and Z, and I just needed to let go and get involved. So I did, and what was wonderful is as soon as I did, Hanya wrote me an email, as I think she did everyone, and just said what she felt about my tape and what she felt about me being on board and how excited she was about the whole project. Because bearing in mind, it had all been done in Holland already, and in Edinburgh, the International Festival, and in New York at BAM. None of those had I seen, but I was, or even been aware of. But I felt like, this is another potential reprisal of a role that somebody else has already done. And as it turns out, is one of Ivo's longest standing collaborators playing Brother Luke and the other two. And, a favorite actor of his company and, of that audience. And I was like, shit, that's quite a lot to live up to as well. So I just, but Hanya was very generous, as she continued to be, with her praise and support and her words of wisdom. And like I say, it was all set up well with Wessex Grove. They kept in touch right up until we started rehearsing with little lunches or little group meetings and so on to keep us, like feeling confident. And I have to say, they handled the whole thing from start to finish brilliantly. Which is why I think large reason why it's been a success. And as a result, I also think I've emerged relatively unscathed. But I would say just one thing about the getting of the role is that the hard work and graft, this is like a word of wisdom to other actors that I might be able to impart. And I've taken a lot of heart from it myself, because I understand that when I auditioned for the previous show a few years ago, like I say, I did the best audition of my life. I prepared to within an inch of my life. I was in the room with Ivo, who doesn't say anything in auditions. And I knocked it out the park, even though I say so myself. It was one of those auditions where you go, yes, I've done it. That's as good and that's exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I got this is good work from Ivo, which Julia, the casting director afterwards, said no one he doesn't ever speak. So well done. And I was
Wow.
like, wow, okay. And I
Yeah.
saw my buddy going in after me to do the same role, and he was like, shit, did you learn it? I haven't learned it. I was like,
Ooh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time on it, but hey, don't worry, dude, you'll be fine. Thinking, yeah, I think I got it. I think he hasn't even learned it. But I said, I'll meet you after for coffee. And he was like, yeah. So he went in, he came out, we had a coffee afterwards, and he was like, shit, that was like, that was a bit. Anyway, he got the role and I didn't. And I was like,
No.
fucking hell, there is no justice. Of course he did, because he was holding it lightly. And I was going in, squeezing it, feeling like, yeah, I'm going to make this fucking the best audition. Evo won't know. He's going to blow his hair back. He's going to be so impressed. But I didn't get it. And Celebi, it all happened and I did something else. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was a bit miffed. You just got to pick yourself up and go on to the next thing. But it was because of that audition, he wanted me to do A Little Life, apparently. That it stayed with him long enough for when he was thinking about British actors to play the roles.
Yeah.
That got me to the front of the queue, that audition. So, which is what the producer said to me after I got the role. And I just was like, great. You see, you put your money in your bank there and it'll look after you in the long term. But don't shirk the opportunities when they come. And, still work hard, Elliot, still give the big ones all the work you need to, and the little ones too.
Mm.
But it will come back to you in the end.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a lot of that on the quiet, on a low level for me in over the last 23 years. And that's probably the most explicit version.
Of course. Yeah. You think he remembered you for 5 years after?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
his job to kind of, I guess, or it is certainly the casting director's job to remind him. But I don't know. I felt like that was, it was also the right, these are weirdly and rather worryingly the right parts for me, whereas that previous role wasn't. I
Okay.
see now the
Yeah.
casting is better. And that is something that I've learned to sort of understand and trust in, that we are walking archetypes to a certain degree. We love to change it up. And, this performance, this role where I play three men, which normally people go, oh God, that's a bit of a downer. You've got three, casters scene or whatever. They aren't ever as meaty or as exciting when you're playing Spear Carrier 1, Drunk Man 3, and so and so, or whatever they might be. You're like, well, okay, I get far less to say. There's not a continuity or an arc probably for either of those characters. And I just want to be, one of the lead characters, for forever I've been thinking like that. I think we all do at some point.
Mm.
But these three parts are the right parts for me and still offer their disparity, their range, even though I still think, and this is the reason it works as a device, I still carry an archetype around with me, as do you, as does every actor, as does every person, should they want to be an actor,
Yeah.
without them, whatever they do. And they can be Christian Bale and change it up. They can change their weight. We can change our weight. We can change our size. I've done it. Hair, wigs, moustaches, voice, the whole shebang. I did it in this show to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But you carry an archetype around with you, and knowing that archetype, learning what that is from drama school or from, is very useful. You don't want to be enslaved by it, but you should know it in the same way that you should know your blood type. It should be something you know will be traded upon, and you can trade upon, and you can hone or you can play against. But there is a certain continuity in those three characters and others that I've played that negate the other first opportunity I thought, to work with Evo, because that's not my archetype.
Mm.
And that's my view on some of this casting shit, for what it's worth.
There you go. Amen to that. So yeah, you mentioned of course the three characters as well. Of course, I just a little disclaimer to say we might stumble on some spoilers, guys. So if you are reading the book or you don't want to know anything, just be wary. We might reveal something in the next few moments. But anyway, on with the show. So you mentioned the guys there: Brother Luke, Dr. Traylor, and Caleb. Three people all sharing the same theme, I think, which is, of course, the villains of the piece, the three bad men in Jude's life who cause him so much, who cause him to give him the trauma that he suffers throughout his life. How did you find all three? Was it quite because they're all quite similar and that they all play a similar role essentially in his life? Was it? But do they all have like a unique identity, even though they all kind of share the same uh, qualities?
Absolutely, absolutely they are. You know, you could have cast them with three very different actors. I mean, like I said, I do hold together this sort of archetypical framework or the skeleton for each one of them that makes it sort of theatrical device and adds to the thematic, carries over some of the themes of the play and Jude's experience to have one man play them all. But they could have been cast by three very different actors. And in my head, when I read them, they all appear very differently. Um, and I would also say, yes, well, the theme or the thing that binds them together is their, what did you just say, their badness or their villainy? Yeah. I mean, villainy is always a difficult place to start when you are
Hmm.
aware that what your function is within the equilibrium, within the sort of the kaleidoscope in the play is basically antagonism, conflict, or some kind of um, negative resistance to the hero's advancement
Hmm.
towards their goal. But actually, you are the function that creates the need for it or helps the arrival of the change and the breakthrough of the hero's journey. You can every story is as good every hero's story is as good as its villain or its antagonist. But I have to say, I never looked at them as villains or even bad men. There is there is a sort of pass, a freedom that I feel is necessary when approaching people like this to not just do that, not to castigate them or label them with any of those types of adjectives when you're building their character, when
Yeah.
building them up.
Yeah.
And it may be only subtle versions of difference. And I think it's sometimes really very greatly, it's very overt. But the adjustment that allows for in your approach to how the psychology of the people work or the character works is very helpful. And I would use the same approach if I had been playing Jude, or if I was playing when I was playing Henry V, or when I was playing other sort of heroes who are more likable, Lord Goring in An Ideal Husband. Even if they were never written with people's psychology really being the basis of their creation by the writer, my approach is always to find out what they really want and why they want it, and how they're going to get it, and why it is they keep trying. And it just so happens that some of those things in this story are very violent and awful and punitive and traumatic for the sort of recipient or the person from whom I want these things. These characters want they mete out their needs,
Yeah.
and by removing the judgment of whether they're villains or bad or menacing or whatever, you aren't going to shirk or be fearful of where that takes you, and you won't just be sort of playing a kind of um, two two-dimensional version of badness and wickedness you've seen before. So I had to take him apart by looking at the book and gleaning from that as much information as I could.
Hmm.
Physical traits, vocal traits, stories, things they say about themselves or said about them. Sometimes in a book that's very helpful because the authorial voice will tell you more about the character than they would ever say about themselves in a play,
Mm.
or anyone would say about them in dialogue of the novel. But the author tells you more about that background. In Hanya's book, there's less of that for these three characters. She does that massively for the other guys. You spend a lot of time in their past, right? Either written down as a sort of letter or an account, a sort of journal, a bit like Harold does, or whether you're sometimes somehow outside of JB and Willem and Jude, and you sort of are seeing them from maybe each other's perspective slightly. With Brother Luke and Caleb and Dr. Traylor, you're ostensibly seeing that from Jude's point of view. And so
Yeah.
all you know really is what Jude knows. And a lot of that is bullshit. A lot of that's, a lie from the character, or it's been obscured. There's been some, it's very hard to learn anything about Dr. Traylor or without the author telling us. It's very hard to know anything about Brother Luke when he lies so much. It's very hard to know anything about Caleb when he's a flash in the pan, really, in the story. But
Mm.
we do learn bits and bobs in a more conventional way from him, because he's in more of a kind of conventional environment and milieu with Jude. So you do that kind of detective work. And then I did quite a lot of psychological detective work, or sort of stringing together of what I thought would be the needs and the reasons for the needs that these people have. And
Mm.
it was really useful having a therapist who visited us all the time, who's, to whom we could speak if we had actually specific like mental health needs. But I could also, as I did a couple of times, say, what do you think this means here when Caleb is like this and obsesses about this, that, the other? And would this come from an absence of this from his childhood, do you think? Or has this been because his parents were ill and there was a sort of, there was he was appalled by the weakness that his parents showed after this, that, and the other? And I'm just thinking about what it is. Every character has a vulnerable center, something that is childlike
Yeah.
and innocent and pure.
Mm.
Every one of us arrives with that, I believe. I don't want to get into nature and nurture type things and whatever, but I think, having had kids myself, I see how when they were so small, there's this little kernel of purity and untouchedness that it carries with it loads of huge amounts of information from me and their mother, but is an open book that doesn't have any corruption or evil in it until things start happening to them.
Mm.
And that's how I sort of approach the character, that I want to find that version of them before all the other stuff started twisting them into something, in this case, very bad, very sort of destructive, or very predatory, or very, dissociative or something, what is it that has made them so? Now, there is a varying approach to each one of them slightly, because they're not all presented the same, in the same style even, or in the same sort of function. They accumulate to become a single function, but there's a disparity between what we see and what we learn of how Brother Luke is presented as a character.
Mm.
And then there's a different style to how Caleb is presented as a character, and then Traylor as a character. And I think that affords the actor a different approach with each one too. And there were different things I allow myself license to experiment with either one of them at different times of the process. And in brief, I would say something like, Brother Luke was more conventional in the fact that I had a sort of an arc with him that was quite clear, and his intermittent arrival strung together with a sort of with its own arc and conclusion. You could see him develop a certain theme, or sort of what's the word? He was develop his need for something, his process to acquire something,
Mm.
and on acquiring it, develop it into something, and his fears about it going, and then ultimately being taken from him.
Mm.
And whilst we couldn't rely on anything he said, both because what he said was towards that goal, what he said to Jude was towards that goal always, and he would lie in order to achieve it and do things just to achieve it. There was enough in that experience in that information to sort of discern what he was, when he was sort of lying and when he was just doing something more in the moment in response to something. But I mean, essentially everything was towards one end,
Yeah.
and that made it quite simple. Caleb was more dreamlike, or it's more expressionistic what happened with him, because his temporally lots of things happened in overlap time wise. It was one big set piece.
Yeah.
That came on, stayed on for 10 minutes or something, and left, and you're never quite sure where you are in time and space. But and so it was erratic, jumping about sometimes between one energy in another, but the intention was always the same too. And that was being ruined or by being resisted by Jude's and Jude's nature and what he brought to the table. Um, and also there was something in that staging that was shrouded in different light and sound and stylization that meant that I could be less subtle in some respects than I was with Brother Luke. And then with Traylor, I think he was very much a device that created a theatrical spectacle at a certain point in the show, and affected us as audience as much as a conventional device might do in a film, where, as Hitchcock says, you know that there's a ticking clock under the table, and when you know that, the conversation between two characters becomes very different. And the way that Ivo filleted out what he needed from the scenes in the book about Traylor made it a very simple functionary device. And in that, and there's something impressionistic about how it's written in the book, so you're never really sure, you don't ever clearly get a picture of Traylor, because when you do, you get some good strong traits, but it's always through the delirium of Jude's illness and his incarceration and his, the cracks in his prison, as it were, in the basement, and not really ever being sure, being where he is in the back of the car, and colors and sounds and shapes. So it's like an early Picasso or something. And then there's the function of the time and the rhythm and the never ending, the unstoppable, inexorable pursuit towards something inevitable and terrible. And so I felt like I could be more superficial with Traylor. And whilst I sketched out certain things based on psychologies, actually with him more than anyone, I turned into an exterior, sort of like a physical and vocal machine, if you like, a mechanism of character. And I played around with that quite a lot. So yeah, those are the three different approaches, slightly in brief. And I think from within each one of those little spotlights or silos of characterization, obviously I made similarly clear choices about gait, physicality, voice, tempo, and obviously costume, and everything was meticulously talked through with Anna, our designer, and Ivo. And so everything got funneled, all those choices got funneled down to pinprick detail. But there was a variation slightly in how I may have manifest them in the moment. And I enjoyed that. That was an amazing acting experience, the best of my career probably, to be picking up like three different swords. You had a rapier here, a short sword, or a broadsword. It was like when you're at school, RADA, in your drama school, and you're taught how to fight in three different ways. But you're all essentially doing the same shit to somebody, trying to get them off you or to kill them or whatever. But there are three different, very different weapons. What's that David Mamet book, The Three Uses of a Knife, which he's talking about in theatre in general. I felt like I was the three uses of a knife in this production, more so than anything. Yeah. And that was great. It's good fun.
Amazing. You mentioned something there about being a machine in a way. And I think that's a good, for one moment in particular with Traylor in the book and of course in the play, where he keeps Jude captive for a long time. And it's funny enough because my mum actually saw it, the show as well. She came to see it at the cinema broadcast, and she picked up on Traylor especially. She said because Traylor gives Jude antibiotics for 10 days because he has a venereal disease which is called off somebody, and at first you're thinking, oh, finally he's getting a bit of help, because he's just had two people, Caleb and Brother Luke, be so bad to him. And yet you feel like for a moment he's getting someone who's taking care of him. And then, of course, that goes completely down the pan. And possibly the most, I'd say, almost cinematic experiences of the show was when Traylor wants to get rid of Jude and chases him in his car. and runs him over and leaves Jude with a gash in his leg, which he never really recovers from. In that moment, of course, you had the music as well. You had the quartet and everything, and it was one of those moments where you sat there and just became engrossed in this world of pain and just I felt like I wanted to run with Jude. I wanted to run with James and say, "Come on, let's just keep going, just keep going, just keep going." It was like the audience was another version of Anna, who I thought Ivo brilliantly brings into the play as well. Because in the book, she's only mentioned only a couple of times. But that moment, especially, just the audience just so encaptured and shocked every single night and afternoon. I mean, tell me about that moment. What was that moment like to play every night?
Yeah, it was intense. I mean, it's amazing to be. It was. I think it reminded me, as you've just reminded me, in your brilliant description and how it affected you, and reminding of my stepping outside of it. It's really, really, really basic theatre, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's like but it's one of the most theatrical, brilliant bits in the whole production. I mean, well, this is what astounds me about Ivo is that he actually doesn't do anything particularly innovative, but somehow the way he places stuff
mm.
seems groundbreaking and sort of like blows people's socks off and creates massive spectacle and impact. And so, for instance, the bit where I just swap from one character to another is what we do all the time as actors and storytellers and children and telling jokes or whatever in the pub or what have you.
Mm.
And we've seen actors do it left, right, and center. But for some reason, having it just there in that moment between those two characters with Jude in that moment always was a talking point for people after the show. Like, oh my God, how did you do it? Wow, that was brilliant. But it's as old as theatre, that bit.
Mm.
And I think the bit that Traylor is that you just described, albeit that it's amplified massively and the light itself is ginormous.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's the sort of thing that has been done for as old as theatre and is theatre. It's just music, space, and time, really. And what the bodies are doing to each other in a very simple, stylized way, because all he's doing is running around in a circle. He's not literally running away from a car across a large space and falling down in the mud and splashes and dirt and all that kind of stuff and the rubber in the he's just running round me in a circle like you do when you're in a playground playing you're doing all that. It's as simple as that, make believe.
Yeah.
I just happen to have a light like I might do with I don't know, I might have a wet towel trying to whip somebody or whatever. And just a lot of noise created by us and by the brilliant quartet.
Mm.
And I just think the culmination of those three things allow all our brains to go, I see it.
Yeah.
I see what that gesture, that little stylized gesture of light, sound, and movement does to the pretext of the story, with Anna's little bit of narration, and then what we do to each other with the energy that we do for we convey that moment. Allows everyone's imaginations to fill in the gaps and just with the most appalling detail as he then collapses and then describes to us what's happening with the car going over his legs and his sort of consciousness leaving his body and the sort of like collapses as if he's about to die. And I could hear people wince and gasp and flinch at that moment as they really put it all together in that moment. But it's just like, I remember seeing The Ghost Train when I was a kid at Mercury Theatre. And I don't know if you know the premise of that play, but as I remember it as a child, it's like a melodramatic story of a bunch of people stuck in an old little station and house somewhere in the middle of nowhere because their train has broken down and they've all and it's meant to be haunted, they realize. And so the big spectacle in that moment is the approach of the ghost train down the track through the window down the back of the stage, this light that's coming closer and closer and closer and closer, and noise and sound and everything else accumulating. And because of all the premise to that moment, you all believe that it's going to happen. This is what's happening. It's the bloody ghost. Everyone's like cowering on stage. And then I think the gag is it's just a bloke with a torch and some steam or something. But as a kid, I was petrified in that moment.
Yeah.
And everyone, all the adults perhaps weren't, but everyone laughs with relief afterwards, like, ah. And that is essentially all we were doing in this moment, but in a different way, a different level of trauma and anxiety and energy and amplification. But my point is, it's been done 100 times before, a million times for thousands of years, and we just did it in this context powerfully because of the context. But I have to say, I did feel like a machine, because Ivo's sometimes his approach to performance or acting is, no, I just need it louder. No, I need that more often. Or yes, that is good, but can you do it more, longer, and count and count and count? And so me and Naz, who did that basically with we contributed a lot vocally to that moment.
Yeah.
Run. And, we extemporized that bit. He said in rehearsal, and now you improvise a little bit, the sequence of running and get up and run faster. You say what you want. And, you think, okay. And in the first time you run it with the guys there, or the soundtrack as it was at that time in rehearsal, and you run into that moment from having kind of marked it for a few days or a couple of weeks when you're learning it. Then in the run, one of the big runs, in the rehearsal room, you elevate it and you realize that you are just going to you've trashed your voice and you can't speak for the next 3 days. Because the adrenaline has given you all that sort of feeling of like, I've got to, yes, this is atrocious behavior. And my character is here. He's running around naked. Naz is shouting too. I got to be louder than Naz. Boof, 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 boof. And we said to the associate director, James, we can't do that. So can you tell him, can we bring it down, or can they record it? I don't know. Okay, word would get out that the actors, and Jeff would go, I know, 8 shows a week.
Yeah.
Shouting like that over each other, over a quartet that are set to volume 11. There's no way that you can just shout, and then do a show later on in the day. No. Even with all the best prep, and mark my words, I was doing that every day I was doing all the prep I could to protect my voice. And in the end, kind of worked out how to do that. But Ivo said, no, we need that. It needs to be spectacle.
Yeah. And
with the light whipping around in people's faces and Jude falling around naked and the screaming and screaming.
Yeah.
I did engage in that moment, I don't know, but being in a scrum, you engage as a forward in rugby, you go into the scrum, everyone pushes in the same way that they know how to push. You're using your whole body, your whole impetus, but it's essentially a form that you've done 1,000 times, and your body is just locked into that device, that mechanical function. And you know as a forward that when you're pressing in, you can't let your neck go. You've got to use your shoulders or get underneath it. You've got to otherwise you'll break your neck. In the same way, as an actor, you're thinking, just drop it down into your belly, make sure you're supporting from under here, pitch it up through your soft palate, and find the note that goes over Naz's sound and that you can hold and hold and hold. And when I was holding that light, which was pretty heavy, the physical demand of that in that sort of strong fashion of straightening my back and using my arms whilst also speaking and being released from here was a sort of practice that you need to think about before it becomes second nature. Otherwise, as I almost did once, you put your back out, or all of this strength and tension here strangles you up here and you kill yourself that way. So it was a technical feat after much other emotional and technical demands, but I knew it was good, so I kept on wanting to do it like that.
It definitely was. And I think and one more thing about Traylor, one bit that really, the show, it takes you from emotional roller coaster through the darkest times of Jude's life. But one moment that really stuck with me, that really made me shiver, actually, was Traylor just before the car sequence, actually, where he orders Jude to take his clothes off, and then he asks him to hand him his underwear, and and
And then
smell
sniffs it. Yeah.
smells it, yeah. And and I remember that scene. I thought, I was watching you going, who the fuck is this guy? And I was thinking, oh, and there were some people around me just went in the theater and later on in the cinema. I literally just went, oh, and I think, oh, wow. And I was thinking, what I mean, just the way that you played menace and evil in that was just, it was spectacular, spectacular. And was that already written in that action of sniffing? Was that in the script?
Yeah, I would love to take credit for it. And maybe I would have come up with something other than that, because it's not in the book, I don't think. I think it came from the previous production. And it's surprising. It was surprising and challenging
Hmm.
how much of the original production, how clearly documented it was through video and through the prompt copy and
Yeah,
through,
yeah,
Ivo's memory and Jan's memory and everyone else, having written things down. That initially our rehearsal process was just largely a mirroring or mimicking of that. It was like earlier I mentioned Laban notation, which was the way that people began to notate dancing, obviously 150 years ago. Laban found out the system of annotating, every footstep of a dance, of a ballet,
hmm,
and every hand gesture, every finger gesture, everything. And these exist as archival, documents that people can learn the original productions of these shows from. Um, and I've now done this twice in recent career. Once for 222 when I was the second cast into that, and then this little live production, which, for all its pomp and ceremony, didn't feel like a second production. It felt like, oh, we were doing something for the first time, but we were reproducing something that had existed before, had succeeded before, but was in a language and with a bunch of people who weren't able to be employed, even though I'm sure they all spoke English. Rules are such that they weren't going to do this one.
hmm,
So it was meticulous initially. How much of that annotated production we then had to replicate,
hmm.
and for the first couple of weeks, that was all that we were expected to do, is learn what they did. And because Ivo's methodology is that you should learn your lines before you turn up to rehearsal, and largely we were, I guess, 75-80% off.
Hmm.
You are free from the usual, like, oh, well, I'm doing this with a script in my hand, so I
Hmm.
sort of don't quite know what it'll be yet. But I know that I need to be down here for this, and I'll move around a bit here. But as soon as I
Yeah,
got this down, then we can start to find out what I do with my hands when I
yeah,
need to kiss you or something. We were free of that, so we were like straight in to that level of performance, but as directed and annotated from this, or directed from this annotation. And that was hard, that was difficult. It came with its challenges as you began to find your version of the character and how the other person was behaving in front of you, and giving you
yeah.
impulses to act upon. And it's a funny thing to consider that all can meld together and justify what was originally decided, because uh, still can be justified when you've got another actor in front of you who's not the same person, with a
Hmm.
different energy, and is inevitably going to do the same gesture with a different level of commitment or interpretation or what have you. But so one of those, that pants sniffing moment is one of those clear, right? And now you pick up his pants and you sniff them. I was like, right. And along with everything else, I'll do exactly as I'm told. I loved the idea. I thought it was brilliant
Hmm.
and enjoyed the act and the effect, but
Hmm.
it wasn't mine. And there were other versions of that too, which I have to thank my predecessor for, I suppose. And um, but then there were probably 1,000 others that I began to feed in as well. And
Hmm.
I couldn't even tell you what they are now, because from the first day of rehearsal in February to the last day of performance in August, I guess things changed incrementally day by day, and you end up with knowing your performance is your performance. And I learned a lot from that experience again about, don't worry, it's going to be yours.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be yours no matter what, because theatre gives you that, is the actor's medium in the end, I think, when your performance is what your performance is. Not to say that you throw away everything a director's given you, but unlike on film, where you can do all this great stuff, but it won't be visible, or it'll be cut out, or it'll be edited in a different way to make your character feel very different.
Mm.
When you're on stage, you're on stage, you're doing it, the audience see it, more or less. Anyone can see it. Therefore, you are sort of in the driver's seat a bit more. So yeah, that comes to all of us in time, and in rehearsal, that can feel sometimes like it's not going to happen, but it does.
Mm.
So those are the sort of benefits and the challenges of working from somebody else's previous interpretation.
Mm.
But I think I did it in the end more than anyone else. I probably smelled pants now more often than the predecessor. So perhaps now it's mine.
That's the unique stamp. That's the unique
Yeah,
stamp.
yeah. That's what I can now say is I did 134 times, whereas
Goodness me.
I don't know who. I don't know how often the other guys did it, but I don't think it was that many.
Yeah, I always wondered, like, because obviously James Norton was Jude. I think by the end of the run, you guys, I could do this image. You going up to James at the end of the run, going, like, "Are you okay? I'm sorry about the last 134 performances. I hope we're still friends."
Well, that's what we had to do. This is going back right to the beginning of what I was saying about checking that the right things are in place to make it possible for us to survive this.
Of course.
I know from having played Macbeth and played Torvald, or a version of Torvald from A Doll's House, or played Stanley in Streetcar, that when you're on somebody's back as badly as all those people are on stage, invariably to women, but sometimes to men, as in this case, you can walk away after a time thinking, what am I doing to this person?
Yeah.
Why, they must fucking hate me. And look at the way they look at you. They think you're a complete wanker, or you're a terrible actor, or you're a horrible human being. Because if you don't go in and say explicitly, how are you doing? Are you all right? Was that all right? Are you unscared? Then if you just disappear off into the night after each show and not check in like that, it all creeps in and you have no idea. There's nothing to recalibrate back to, no, dude, that was brilliant. Loved it. You were so on it tonight, or whatever. Or, can you not thrust quite so hard into me until my hips are over the bit of metal frame that are now jabbing into my pelvis?
Yeah.
Cool. Got it. James and I checked in half time every show and at the end of every show and before every show to make sure that continuity was never broken. And I said that to him day one. This is what I'm going to do. Because from my experience, if you just leave it to bon ami, it's going to go sour. But I love James with all the sort of affection of somebody who's been through something and kind of managed it together responsibly and with care. And, and I've got the hugest amount of respect for him to have done it, what he's done, what he carried throughout that show, and what he allowed me to carry as well, to do, not do to him, but to do as an actor, as an artist, allowing me the trust and the space, always saying to me, "You're cool, it's good." No, you're giving me trust. He trusted me, and I trusted him massively, and more so than anyone, because it demanded more so than anyone I've worked with. But I've had versions of this before that are good and versions which are bad, and I'm never going to let that bad one happen again on my watch as best I can.
Yeah.
And I'm learning this more and more. So, if nothing else, that's what I'm good for in this game.
Absolutely, man. I'm very aware of the time. I know you got to shoot off very, very soon. I still have so many more questions for you, but sadly, time doesn't allow me to do that. So,
I'll push on for a bit. It's fine. Let's get some things done. Yeah.
No. Of course, no. Seriously, I've got so many more. We'll probably would be here for another 2 hours with all the questions I've got. But no. But let's do this again at some point. I'd love to have you back to talk more about this. Just two more things for you today, Elliot. One of which is with you talking about there about the trust between yourself and James, and I think not only between, I think as a group, I think trust. It was very very evident that all of you were trusting each other hugely, and that you all had each other's back. You all had each other's. Um, I mean, I don't know if this for sure, but I can imagine if one of you walked into the rehearsal or a performance day feeling a bit down or feeling like I don't know how I'm going to get through this today, but I get an image of you guys really holding on to each other and going, no, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. We'll do this together, type thing. And I think that
Mm.
reminds me of, I spoke to someone recently about being like the importance of intimacy coordinators and stuff. And I know you had one on this one as well. And how important it is. And I'm from that intimacy coordination about trusting each other and really creating this bond together and getting through such a tough show 8 times a week, sometimes twice in one day. And yeah, was that the vibe that you got backstage of just trust?
Sure, massively. Yeah, yeah. It was. I mean, it obviously it was James was my key um, person in that. My whole story is just with him, everything. But and also it was the darkest stuff or the most demanding stuff of that kind in the show. But we were all, on some level, I think, massively exposed by our characters' journeys, and whether that was sexual or whether that was intimate or whether that was emotional, sort of tragic, or whether that was mental breakdowns or whatever. I think every one of us, grief, massive grief, openness, like huge open wounds that this show, this book, in, allows to people to rummage around in and to see open
Yeah.
as wide as they can be. I think that's the sort of raison d'etre of the show, really, or the story is like that level of, and that's why some people can't balk at it, because it's a hard place to look and ask people to really like stare at, and that's what Ivo did with his unrelenting sort of pauses or moments of like real time action. That, whoa, do I still have to see so much? Is my gaze still demanded on this thing that's happening, or this person's grief or collapse or their mental breakdown, and or the abuse, or this, are we still looking? Do we still have to look? And yeah, we do, and we
Mm.
still had to do them. And each one of us, from JB, Amari played JB,
Mm.
carried the opening of the show with a deft sort of dominance of the first few minutes or passages of the play,
Yeah.
not few minutes, several minutes,
Yeah.
that was really exposing to run the show like that. And then quite quickly after that, to have a complete mental breakdown on stage or panic attack. Every day we saw him do that with utter commitment. And just to collapse like that with perhaps very little sort of upshot
Mm.
required him to be as trusting of us as James was of me, doing something far more graphically violent and sexual. And with Zubin's level of grief and
Mm.
open-heartedness about his loss of children or sons in his life,
Yeah.
the way he prepared himself for those moments every night and allowed himself just to be an open-chested
Mm.
exposure of heart and humanity, like so much bravery and trust in us all to just understand what he needed and where he was going every night. We worried about him, we'd check in with each other about him. And I shared a dressing room with him and Emilio, and we'd talk, to him and around him. And not because he was like doing anything weird or strange, or because, we were thinking he was being irresponsible and unprofessional, just because, we knew that he was laying his heart out on stage every night
Mm.
and just wanted to make sure he was okay. Um, and with Luke and what he goes through with playing Willem, with Naz playing Anna, everyone's moments came to them at some point, and from the out, we just knew we were there for each other. and they set it up brilliantly with Victoria Abbott talking to us about capacities for stress and strain and grief and emotion and things that where you fill up your vessel and then it overflows and what to do at those certain points.
Mm.
And we had a wonderful assistant director called Alice who was trained in mental health as well, and she would come in at first aid and come in and just go and sort of you'd know that someone was looking out. And Tamsin, our company manager, at several points, some person in the company would just be there to catch one of us.
Yeah.
And we did it for each other, and we were there in warm-ups every night. There was a sort of social going on. You're either like on the fringes doing your yoga, or you were sitting back catching up about what you'd done that day. And and we were really open about personal things in a way that I'm not always able to be with a company of people I'm sharing all this time with.
Yeah.
But we knew we were in it together, and we could do that with each other, and no one abused it. No one was a shit about it. No one was duplicitous or avaricious or selfish or egotistical. It was just an amazing collaboration with some really wonderful people who just were given the space to be at their best. And I think that's such a privilege, and that's what you hope for.
Mm.
I think we're lucky to have it.
Absolutely. Elliot, this has been an amazing talking to you today. It's been absolutely wonderful. I mean, I still have so many more questions for you. Let's do this again at some point. We'll go back to a little life in the future and talk some more about Brother Luke and of course Caleb as well. Just two more questions actually for you today. I know I said two just a second ago, but just another one just crept into my head.
I'll try and keep them shorter then.
No,
answer everyone with a lifetime's question.
No. Talk, man. Talk. I love hearing it. Just two more things. What was it like having the author there, having Hanya Yanagihara, if I said that right, in the room with you, and of course giving you all this stuff? I think Zubin called it the fountainhead. You've got the fountainhead in the room with you the whole time. What's she like, and what was it like having her around to talk to?
It was brilliant. It was really good. I've had writers in the room before, and it's not always been as good. But like I said from the beginning, when we got these emails from her very early on, as soon as we said yes, there's sort of an immediate volunteering of support, of trust, of recognition, of joy with having you or having it created by you guys. And she's just got some special qualities as a person, as a leader, probably in her editor life, and as a commentator on human nature, which is what a great author can be. She's very understated. She's very solid and grounded in her demeanor, physically and vocally, and she holds her space like a very like a woman with great experience and who's taken responsibility on her shoulders in the past for people, and she's understated about it and modest and generous to other people, and so she was there quite a lot, and she would make comments about. You get notes from people in the system about their change of dialogue or maybe a query about a choice. And that was mediated well by those powers that be, the associate director, chef, or whomever, who would be meting that out in respect to her authority and her vision, but also in respect to you as an artist and how to manage that. And I loved her. I loved her being around, and she treated us really well to a couple of nice dinners, and she would be there at key moments as Ruben says, as a kind of figurehead of the whole endeavor. And the fact that you just knew that she trusted you as an actor to represent these characters. And we had 2-hour chats with her in the first week of rehearsal, each of us in private, where she just lifted the lid of some of the characters, and she gave us these great insights and stories about not necessarily where they came from, these characters, or anything more that's in the book, but there was something you could ask questions about and I've got notes on that somewhere, that I did make choices on my characters based on, but she just basically gave me confidence. Whereas some, I've been in the room with a writer before, and I almost came to a breakdown, just feeling like she hates what I'm doing.
Oh,
That's I'm out there on a limb, as I was on this show, busting my balls, trying something mad that she's created for me to do, and I really don't think she likes it. And that, if you get that in your head,
yeah,
it's hard, because often a writer in that position is told not to speak, not to get involved in the conversation too much, and that just works against. That aggravates your neurosis even further. You're like, why
yeah,
is she saying it? She's not even saying she likes it, or well done. And every lack of comment or every type of gesture is then
yeah,
coloured with that neurosis, and it
yeah,
just
yeah.
compounding your fears worse. And I've been so grateful sometimes when writers have left, but with Hanya, I look forward to her being there,
Oh,
um,
good.
and I hope we see each other again sometime.
Of course you will. I'm sure. I hope to meet her myself. Actually, yeah, she seems
She's
like an
cool.
extraordinary person. And finally, the last question for you, Elliot. The last question for every guest, which is, what's been an experience or experiences you've had in your career up to this point that you're never ever going to forget?
Yeah, well, probably when in my first film I got cast about a year and a half out of leaving drama school, and I'd done a bit of theatre and TV by that time, but I hadn't done any movies ever, even pre drama school or anything. And it was a big one to get cast in, and the casting process was very, very long and involved, because I was playing the younger version of an actor whom I had from an oddly early age, loved from the age of 10 or 11, when I started seeing him in films that perhaps 10 and 11-year-olds wouldn't really enjoy, but I loved. Howard's End, Remains of the Day, Shadowlands. I wonder if you can guess.
Hmm.
It was Anthony Hopkins, of course, whom I was waiting to hear accepted a role, so that I was going to be cast as his younger self,
Hmm.
which, whether you could see it or not, was apparently the basis of me being cast.
Hmm.
And had he said no, and I believed the reason why he was vacillating is because I think his mother or father had recently passed away, and he
Yeah.
was trying to manage their estate and so on. And it was Oliver Stone who cast him as Ptolemy in Alexander the Great, a film about Alexander the Great that Colin Farrell was in. And for better or for worse, that film was my first, and it was an amazing experience from the beginning. As soon as I learned as soon as I met Oliver, to be honest. But I didn't get to meet or uh, work with Anthony until I had filmed a lot already in Marrakesh.
Yeah.
Um, but I had tried to acquire knowledge about how he was going to use his voice, whether he was going to just be Anthony Hopkins or whether he was going to do anything different, like he sometimes does. And but because of this incident with his family, this loss, he was not very forthcoming initially. So I had to just get on with it. And
Hmm.
I decided I would do my best Anthony Hopkins kind of impression. I would make a nod to the fact it was him.
Hmm.
So I watched all his young films, all his early films, Lion in Winter. God, they're all going to escape me now. But there were a bunch I spent some time watching. I guess Remains of the Day and things like that. They all
Yeah.
have different qualities, but there's an Anthony Hopkins voice, which usually on the bounty and things like that. And so I did these scenes with Oliver and Colin where I was playing, I had an accent. I had a slightly Welsh Anthony Hopkins type. I mean, I don't know if I can still bring it up, but
Hmm.
we did it. And then we came back to London from Morocco, and they were going to shoot Tony's stuff. So Oliver says to me, "Why don't you come and meet Tony? He's going to be in the Charlotte Street Hotel tomorrow, 10 o'clock, before we start shooting on Monday." I was like, "Shit, really?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, come along." And that was just around the corner from RADA, that hotel. So I was on my way there that morning, bricking it, and
Hmm.
I bumped into my favorite acting teacher just outside RADA.
Hmm.
And he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "You'll never believe it. I'm going to meet Anthony Hopkins right now." And he was like, shh. And I told him why. And he was like, my acting coach was like super stoked, as was I. But he
Mm.
made me late because I
Oh
hadn't
no.
legislated for that. So I got there kind of like with my knickers in a twist anyway. It's bloody Anthony Hopkins and
Yeah.
Tony and Oliver Stone. And they were in some conference room. And I went in there and there they were. And I was like, oh, God, introduced to Tony and shook his hand. And it was all like his enormous hand. It was like a spade, like gripped me. Like he probably he's never been down a mine, but he had like miner's hands. And he was like, very pleased to meet you. How do you do? Oh, Elliot, yeah, playing young Ptolemy, great. And and Oliver was like, yeah, you gotta meet him. It's just been doing a great job, Tony. He's filmed a lot of his scenes already. The way he says, yeah, does your voice is brilliant, brilliant. Go and show him how you say Alexander. So the way you say Alexander, Elliot, is just like Tony. So I was like, yeah, I guess I think he was. No, go on, show him, tell him. Like, you want me to
Oh
say?
my
And
God.
Tony was like, yeah, how do you say? What do I say? And I said, I don't know, Tony. It's kind of like I don't know. I listened to a lot of your stuff, and when it came to that word, it was like Alexander. I could feel like by saying Alexander, and then Tony Hopkins came back to him and said, what do you mean, like Alexander? Alexander? I was like, yes, Alexander. And we just started playing Alexander tennis with Tony Hopkins. It was like that scene in The Trip
Yeah.
when um, when Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon do different versions of Michael Caine, trying to one up each other, but they're doing someone who's not in the room, whereas I was doing it with
Yeah.
the guy I was taking off. And I guess it reminded me of that bit when Tom Hiddleston does Bob De Niro in front of him on some chat show. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God. And I double cringe when I see that because
Yeah.
that's essentially what I was doing with Tony.
Yeah.
But bless him, the gentleman he is, he just was like, happy to, hear that sounded great. Absolutely. And then I was invited to join him at the studio for the next week and just watch him work and listen to him and Oliver talk on the cans. I was
Mm.
able to watch cans by the monitor and listen to the conversations they had. And that was amazing because it's like Anthony Hopkins talking because they had done Nixon together. They had a shorthand and they had a trust. And you know what was the main thing I remember from that? I wish I'd kept a journal or something, was that he always said yes. Everything that Oliver came to him with, he just
Mhm.
went, okay, no, right, yeah. And then he'd do it. And bit by bit, you'd see the range of different things he'd offer. And after that, I bumped into the editor and he said, you know what's brilliant about Tony is that he'll give 7 different versions of the same take, same shot.
Mhm.
And they're all different, those 7. But they all string together with all the others. There's nothing so outlandish that you can't use that with that. And it's a
Mm.
graphic equalizer that's done this.
Yeah.
And somehow and he had just emotion. He could just bring it up when it was necessary. And he was, I don't know, he breaks my heart when I see him struggling with his collapse internally, like in The Father. That was just amazing. He's
Oh,
always been a hero, but I never thought I'd have to teach him how to speak in his own accent. But thanks to Oliver Stone, I have. So that's probably the bit I'll never forget.
absolutely. Alexander. Alexander.
Alexander,
Alexander.
Alexander,
Alexander.
Alexander. It's like mutiny. They do it too in The Trip when they do
Yeah.
Yusha. They do. I can't remember what the expression from Mutiny and the Bounty that the two of them take off Anthony Hopkins, and I'm familiar with that sound, that little bite that he has at the back of his throat when he
Yeah.
barks. It's just
Box.
so it's just
Yeah.
so powerful.
Yeah. Alexander. No, wait, that's British. Hang on.
Yeah, that's English. You go Alexander.
Oh,
You've got that some sort
Alexander.
of
Alexander. There's wonderful Tony Hopkins.
Alexander.
Alex-
Anthony Hopkins. Yeah. And he does this brilliant thing when he gets too much. He does it in The Remains of the Day, and he does it in Howard's End.
Hmm.
And I think they're both with Emma Thompson. These scenes where he's basically, he loves her and he can't tell her. And he is breaking down. But as one of those buttoned up Englishmen that he's playing in both those brilliant roles, he can't be seen to be showing emotion.
Mm.
And his instinct is to hide his face with his three spade-like fingers like that. Just hide his eyes as he's breaking down. God, breaks my heart.
Yeah.
So
It's,
amazing.
yeah, he's one of my favorites. I love him dearly. Yeah. God. Yeah, hard to follow on from that, really.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
God.
it's good meeting that hero because he was absolutely impeccably wonderful.
Oh,
Lovely.
yeah. Yeah. They always say never
And
meet your heroes, but on that occasion, you definitely do. You
yeah,
definitely
yeah, but it worked to my advantage. And I don't think that's always been, I don't think that will always be the case or has always been the case. But yeah, he really lived up to my expectations
do. Mm.
and more. So love him. Love him.
No, Alexander.
Alexander.
Alexander. Wait, I need to go to Alexander. I know that's. I'm gonna practice that now. I'm gonna that now.
Well, somewhere I've got tapes of me with a voice coach, like early, it was 2003, so 20 years ago.
Mm.
And we spent hours listening to all these little snippets from the films I was watching on DVD and trailers, just with a dictaphone, just recording. I mean, it's so much easier now with YouTube or
Mm.
with voice phones and stuff for voice memos. But I had to really like out in Marrakesh, I had to get hold of the films. I had to get a laptop. I had to play them on the laptop with a dictaphone. It was quite a laborious but lovely
Mm.
pursuit. And I would say there was a little bit of one of his voices that I started with when I did Trailer. And Trailer's voice changed a bit, but I think I started with Trailer and Hannibal Lecter being quite close in vocal range. I
Mm.
tried to get something in the voice, which was because there's something in the way that Clarice, he places it up here,
Clarice.
and but it's an
Yeah.
American. He's American, isn't he? But it's not. He's Southern even,
Mm.
but it's not really strong.
Mm.
And that's how I wanted Dr. Traylor to sound. I didn't, for some reason, I instinctively felt that Dr. Traylor wouldn't have a very pr- pronounced American accent. He would have one of those sort of accents that academic, slightly pretentious Americans might have if they've been trying to iron out some of that and sound a little bit more high, lofty, and intellectual.
Mm.
So I used that as a reference point at some point in my assembly of Dr. Traylor.
Yeah. I think if I was there, I'd be like, I love Jude and Silence of the Lambs. That was one of my favorite acting, probably my favorite acting performance. Well, definitely one of them. Yeah, there's several, but if I was there, I'd be like, just thank you for that performance.
Sure.
That made me want to be an actor.
Well, I don't think I did gush. I think I kept my shit together a bit, having embarrassed myself with the initial meeting. I didn't
Yeah,
want to again. And I remember being in the makeup truck with him, just sat there, sort of listening to him talk to everyone, just as I was just soaking up the atmosphere, because it was only him and another actor in these scenes that he was in.
yeah,
So there's a lot of space and time to talk to him. Um, but I remember him just saying, "So what's going on? When you go to the theatre, what's going on at the moment? What should I go and see?" And there were things I was talking about I had seen, and he was inquisitive to find out, and he had been to RADA and he was finding out more about it. So
mm,
I'd only just been, so he was wondering about who ran it and all that kind of thing. No, it was just great. And but for me, there's something the fact it was Shadowlands which made me realize, well, I mean, that film broke me in twain
mm,
when he's with the boy and
yeah,
they're up in the attic and the boy finally breaks down. He holds him, and then you see Tony breaking down, C.S. Lewis breaking down next to him, and I think I saw that film when I was about 13, and
wow,
I was a gibbering wreck in the cinema,
yeah,
just astounded by how much I could feel from. I don't think I've seen many grown men cry in my life at that point. Whereas now it's far more common. Back then, I mean,
yeah,
this must have only been in the early 90s, but I don't think men let themselves look like that.
mm,
Even and particularly in movies, strong men like with barrel chests and spade-like hands and heads like footballs.
mm,
He was like the toughest nut out there, Hannibal Lecter and everything, a psychopath, but he could still show vulnerability that that not everyone wants to in performance. And I think that has existed for me as a bit of a talisman.
Yeah.
To allow vulnerability to be the kind of language of, to evoke empathy, that hopefully we can all feel for each other when we're in a theatre together.
Hugely. Elliot, I could talk to you all day. I really, really could.
It's got dark since we started, isn't it?
It has,
so
yeah.
I'm
very aware. I'm being illuminated now. I'm just catching a view of myself.
Different white balance. Yeah.
Different white balance, yeah. So that's well good. The main light would be too harsh. But yeah, Elliot, let's do this again at some point. I'd love to have you back on. Yeah, it's been amazing talking to you. If you just hang on, I'll finish the recording. I'll say goodbye to you one-to-one. Yeah, wow, this has been fantastic. Guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This has been the Uncensored Critic, and I'll be back very soon. And yeah, Elliot, thank you so much.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks. Thanks for your time, a chance to talk about it. Thanks for tolerating all my jabbering on. It's been great.
No, it's been amazing. Thank you.